Patrick Kearney, known as the Trash Bag Killer, was one of the most prolific serial killers in California, targeting young men and boys in the 1970s. His life, from his childhood through to his crimes and eventual capture, is a chilling tale of a seemingly ordinary man with deeply dark tendencies. Patrick Wayne Kearney was born on September 24, 1939, in East Los Angeles, California. His early life was marked by troubling circumstances that many believe contributed to his later violent behavior. Kearney was a small and sickly child, often bullied by his peers due to his size and appearance. This bullying led to feelings of insecurity and resentment that he would carry into adulthood. He grew up in a relatively normal middle-class family, but by all accounts, he was socially isolated and withdrawn. Kearney's family moved frequently, which further contributed to his difficulty in forming lasting relationships with peers. As a teenager, Kearney began exhibiting disturbing behavior. He reportedly had fantasies of committing violent acts and began killing small animals. These early signs of violence were not recognized as warnings of his future behavior at the time. As Kearney entered adulthood, he attempted to live a somewhat conventional life but was unable to suppress his darker urges. Kearney worked as an aeronautical engineer, a well-paying job that afforded him financial stability and the ability to lead a private life. He was highly intelligent and skilled in his profession, and his co-workers saw him as quiet and unremarkable. Kearney was gay, but at the time, societal pressure and prejudice against homosexuality likely compounded his isolation. He had difficulty forming meaningful relationships and harbored intense feelings of anger and frustration, which contributed to his violent impulses. Kearney's first known murders began in the late 1960s. His victims were usually young men or boys, many of whom were hitchhikers or men he met in bars. Kearney used his charm to lure his victims into his car, often under the pretense of giving them a ride. Patrick Kearney's killing spree took place from the late 1960s to 1977. Over this period, he killed at least 21 people, though he later confessed to murdering as many as 28. His methods were cold, calculated, and methodical. Kearney was known for his brutal yet efficient methods of killing. After luring victims into his car, he would often shoot them in the head, sometimes while driving, to prevent them from struggling. This quick method of execution minimized the chance of leaving behind evidence. After killing his victims, Kearney would take their bodies home, where he would dismember them, often using a hacksaw. He meticulously wrapped the remains in plastic trash bags before dumping them in various locations, including remote areas along highways or desert regions in California. Kearney's quiet, unassuming demeanor allowed him to evade detection for years. He was careful in selecting his victims, often choosing individuals who were transient or whose disappearances wouldn't attract significant attention. His clean and efficient disposal methods made it difficult for authorities to trace the murders back to him. Despite his calculated methods, Kearney's crimes eventually caught up with him. In 1977, one of his victims was linked to him through a connection with a mutual acquaintance. Police began investigating Kearney after the body of one of his victims was discovered, and he was connected to the victim through mutual social circles. Investigators began focusing on Kearney and his partner, David Hill, as potential suspects. Once Kearney realized he was under investigation, he and Hill fled to El Paso, Texas, in an attempt to avoid arrest. However, within weeks, they returned to California, where Kearney voluntarily surrendered to the authorities. Kearney's confession was remarkably straightforward. He admitted to his crimes in exchange for a deal to avoid the death penalty. During interrogation, Kearney provided detailed confessions to the murders, leading investigators to several crime scenes and offering specifics about how he killed his victims. He confessed to 28 murders, though he was ultimately convicted of 21 due to the difficulty in identifying all the victims. Kearney accepted a plea deal in which he pled guilty to multiple murders in exchange for life in prison without the possibility of parole. His willingness to cooperate with the authorities and provide confessions was likely motivated by his desire to avoid execution. Following his conviction, Patrick Kearney was sentenced to life in prison and was incarcerated at California State Prison. He remains there to this day. In prison, Kearney has largely kept a low profile. He does not have the same notoriety as serial killers like Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy, so his life in prison has not been as publicly scrutinized. There are no reports of him being harmed or involved in altercations while incarcerated, and he has largely faded from public attention. Like many serial killers who prey on vulnerable individuals, Kearney is likely regarded with contempt by other prisoners. Though there have been no reports of violence against him, he is known to live a quiet life in prison, much as he did outside, avoiding significant attention. Patrick Kearney's killing spree is often overshadowed by other more notorious serial killers of the era, but he remains one of the most prolific in California's history. His ability to evade capture for so long, despite leaving behind a large number of victims, is a testament to his meticulous and careful nature. Kearney's method of quickly dispatching his victims, dismembering them, and disposing of the bodies in trash bags was methodical and efficient, allowing him to go undetected for nearly a decade. Unlike many serial killers, Kearney did not engage in prolonged torture or sexual violence. He killed quickly and with little sign of remorse. His motives seem to stem more from anger and control than from sadistic pleasure. Despite his high victim count, Kearney remains less infamous than his contemporaries. This may be due in part to his low-key personality and the fact that he did not seek the same level of attention that other killers craved. Patrick Kearney's life, from his troubled childhood through his years of calculated murder, reveals the story of a deeply disturbed individual who managed to hide in plain sight. His confession and subsequent life sentence brought an end to his reign of terror, though the true extent of his crimes may never be fully known. Today, Kearney remains a relatively obscure figure in the annals of serial killer history. Despite the horrific nature of his actions, the repercussions of Patrick Kearney's crimes extended beyond his own life, affecting the families of the victims and the broader community. His murders raised awareness about the dangers facing vulnerable populations and highlighted failures in the systems designed to protect them. The families of Kearney's victims experienced profound grief and trauma due to the sudden and violent loss of their loved ones. Many victims were young men with bright futures, and their untimely deaths left emotional scars on their families and friends. The nature of Kearney's murders, particularly the dismemberment and disposal of the bodies, made it challenging for families to find closure. Many families struggled with not knowing the full details of their loved ones' deaths, or having to endure prolonged periods without answers before Kearney's capture and confession. Families of victims, who were often transient or involved in lifestyles that society deemed less valuable, such as hitchhiking or engaging in sex work, often faced stigma. The societal biases against these individuals meant their stories received less media attention, compounding the family's feelings of isolation in their grief. Kearney's murders instilled fear in the communities where the crimes occurred, particularly in areas frequented by young men. The knowledge that a serial killer was operating in California heightened mistrust among people, leading to increased caution about accepting rides from strangers and interacting with unfamiliar individuals. Kearney's case highlighted the challenges law enforcement faced in tracking serial killers, particularly those who targeted vulnerable populations. Investigators began to develop better methods for linking missing persons cases and murders, leading to improved interagency cooperation in tracking such criminals. Although Kearney may not have received the same level of media attention as other serial killers, his crimes nonetheless contributed to the sensationalism surrounding serial murder during the 1970s. The media's portrayal of serial killers often blended fact with fiction, influencing public perception and fear of crime. Kearney's case has been studied in the context of psychological profiling and criminal behavior. His background as a bullied child and his eventual turn to violence fit into broader patterns observed in serial killers, offering insights into the psychological underpinnings of such criminals. While Kearney is not as widely recognized as other serial killers, his story has found its place in true crime literature and documentaries, focusing on lesser-known serial killers. His methodology and the sheer number of his victims have sparked interest among true crime enthusiasts and researchers. The Kearney case and others like it have contributed to ongoing discussions about the treatment of marginalized individuals in society. The plight of victims, who are often seen as less worthy of protection, has led to greater advocacy for vulnerable populations and the importance of recognizing their humanity. As of now, Patrick Kearney remains incarcerated, serving his life sentence at California State Prison, Los Angeles County. He has largely maintained a low profile and has not sought media attention since his trial. Kearney is not known to have engaged in any significant violent behavior while in prison, and he has lived a relatively quiet life behind bars. Kearney has undergone mental health evaluations while in prison, and his behavior has generally been described as stable. He does not exhibit the same erratic behavior that some other serial killers display and has not been reported to be involved in violent incidents with fellow inmates. Unlike some serial killers who continuously seek to appeal their sentences or garner public attention through interviews, Kearney has not pursued these avenues. He seems content to remain out of the public eye, focusing instead on serving his sentence. Patrick Kearney's life and crimes encapsulate the complexities of human psychology, the effects of violence on victims' families, and the broader societal implications of serial murder. His story serves as a reminder of the dark potential that can exist within seemingly ordinary individuals and the lasting impact their actions can have on families and communities. While he may not be as well known as some of his contemporaries, Kearney's legacy as the trash bag killer endures in the annals of true crime history, prompting ongoing discussions about the nature of evil, societal neglect, and the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable populations. The story of Patrick Kearney and his crimes not only highlights the individual tragedies of his victims, but also prompts critical reflections on societal attitudes toward crime, justice, and mental health. Here are some key themes that emerge from his life and the broader implications of his actions. Kearney's background of bullying and isolation raises questions about how childhood experiences can influence adult behavior. His trajectory from a troubled youth to a serial killer suggests that untreated psychological issues and social ostracism can manifest in violent ways. Kearney's case highlights the need for early intervention and mental health support for individuals showing signs of distress or violent tendencies. Understanding the psychological factors that lead to criminal behavior can be crucial in preventing future violence. The nature of Kearney's victims, young men often homeless or transient, reflect societal biases that prioritize certain lives over others. Kearney's ability to evade capture for so long was partly due to the perception that his victims were less deserving of attention and protection. The case has spurred discussions about the need for better protection of marginalized communities. Advocacy groups have emerged to raise awareness about the dangers faced by these populations and to push for policies that prioritize their safety and welfare. Kearney's evasion of law enforcement for years underscores the challenges police face in identifying and apprehending serial killers. The lack of interconnected databases and the resources needed to track patterns of violence among transient individuals have historically hampered investigations. His case eventually contributed to the development of better practices in criminal investigations, particularly concerning tracking missing persons and unsolved homicides. Increased collaboration among agencies has become vital in addressing serial killings more effectively. While Kearney may not have garnered the same media attention as other serial killers, the fascination with such figures in popular culture raises questions about the glorification of violence. This can lead to desensitization to the suffering of victims and their families. The way the media covers cases of serial killers can influence public perception. Responsible reporting that prioritizes the voices of victims and their families rather than sensationalizing the killer's actions is essential in fostering empathy and understanding. Efforts to honor and remember Kearney's victims have been overshadowed by the notoriety of the killer himself. Initiatives that focus on raising awareness about the lives lost and the impact on families can help ensure that victims are not forgotten. Educating the public about the signs of violence and the importance of looking out for vulnerable individuals can be vital in preventing future tragedies. Community outreach programs aimed at providing resources and support to at-risk populations can help create a safer environment. Kearney's story, while less well known, contributes to a larger narrative surrounding serial killers in American culture. The fascination with such figures often manifests in documentaries, podcasts, and books, leading to complex discussions about morality, justice, and human psychology. Kearney's crimes have been featured in various true crime documentaries, providing insight into his methods and the societal failures that allowed him to operate undetected for so long. Such portrayals often seek to understand the psychological motivations behind his actions, while also highlighting the human cost of his crimes. The enduring interest in serial killers and the narratives surrounding them reflects a societal need to understand the darker aspects of human behavior. This interest can serve as both a cautionary tale and a catalyst for change in how society addresses issues of crime, mental health, and victim advocacy. Patrick Kearney's life and the impact of his actions continue to resonate, serving as a poignant reminder of the complexities of human nature and the societal factors that contribute to violence. While he remains in prison, the stories of his victims and the lessons learned from his case endure, prompting ongoing conversations about how to prevent such tragedies in the future. By examining the life of Patrick Kearney and the aftermath of his crimes, we gain insights not only into the mind of a serial killer, but also into the societal structures that can either support or fail to protect vulnerable individuals. His case underscores the necessity of vigilance, compassion, and a commitment to justice for all, particularly those who are most at risk.